All right, so Argentina today. We're going deep on this one. A listener sent us a clip from a Spanish language podcast.
Right.
And it's all about, well, President Milei and his pretty big move to cut import taxes.
Yeah.
Big time, like starting in December.
Huge.
Yeah. So cheaper tech, cars,
Cosmetic stuff,
appliances, all those things that Argentinians usually have to import.
Right, yeah.
But I bet you're thinking, is it really going to be cheaper? What about businesses there? Are they going to get crushed?
Yeah, totally. All good questions.
Yeah, so to help us break it all down, we've got our expert here who's already gone through that podcast.
I have, yeah. It's fascinating. This was like the thing for Milei's campaign, shaking things up, free markets, all that. And this import tax cut, that's a big step in that direction. The podcast really highlights like how this could drop prices.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, things like smartphones, maybe 15% less, and certain car models, almost 10% cheaper.
Wow.
Yeah, that's significant.
Okay, so that's a real benefit for consumers. But the podcast, they also seem kind of worried about businesses, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Cheaper imports, that's got to make it tough for companies in Argentina.
Exactly. The podcast, it kind of paints this picture, local businesses, especially in manufacturing, the auto industry, and tech. They're already facing an uphill battle. Costs are high, and now they got to go head-to-head with these cheaper imports, tough choices coming, maybe layoffs, cutting back, even shutting down.
Yeah. It's got to create tension, right? Economic and social tension. Podcast mentioned people worried about jobs, unrest, all that. But before we get to doom and gloom, is there a chance businesses can adapt? Did the podcast talk about that?
Yeah, they did touch on that. Some economists were saying that Argentine businesses might need to specialize more, find their niche where they can really excel. Others talked about the government needing to step in, support them, investing in technology, maybe making regulations easier.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe there are ways to make it work, but let's zoom out for a sec.
Yeah.
Big picture stuff.
Yeah.
The podcast, they mentioned a trade deficit, right?
They did.
Can you explain that? Why does that matter here?
Of course. Okay, so trade deficit, it basically means a country is importing more stuff than it's sending out, exporting, like spending more than you're earning each month.
Right.
And Argentina, they already have a big trade deficit. And cutting these import taxes, it could make that even bigger. See, cheaper imports sound good for us, the shoppers, but it means more money's leaving the country to pay for those foreign goods.
Okay, so that puts pressure on their financial stability, especially with everything else going on.
Exactly. It's like trying to juggle while standing on one of those wobbly boards. Yeah, Argentina, they're already dealing with debt, inflation, and a weak currency, cutting import taxes, just another thing to balance. And the podcast, they highlighted that.
So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
Cheaper stuff for people now, but maybe trouble later.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it.
Did the podcast talk about how Milei is addressing this, like those concerns?
They did. The podcast pointed out that Milei, he sees this as like a bigger strategy, boost the Argentine economy.
Yeah.
His argument seems to be that making imports more affordable, it'll get people spending more. And that could lead to growth.
Okay, a gamble,
Yeah.
but a potential upside.
Right, if it pays off.
What I really liked, the podcast, they included different opinions. You said economists, business people, but were there any people completely against this?
Oh, absolutely. The podcast had several of Miley's opponents on, and they were saying this policy is reckless, it's going to hurt the economy. They were hitting hard on potential job losses, the trade deficit getting worse, and the risk of relying too much on foreign goods, and they even brought up environmental damage.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, they were saying cheaper imports mean people might buy and waste more.
So some serious debate in Argentina.
Definitely. That's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not just numbers and charts. It's real people and businesses dealing with this.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's why we do these deep dives, right? To get past the headlines, understand what's really going on. And for that, we need all those different voices. Did the podcast, did they talk about how people are actually reacting?
Yeah, they did. They talked to some everyday Argentinians about what they thought about these tax cuts. Some were excited, lower prices.
Yeah.
But others, they were worried about businesses and jobs. It was really interesting to hear their thoughts, see how this is playing out for them.
Okay, so a lot to unpack here. Benefits, risks, lots of unknowns about what happens next. But before we get into all that, let's make sure we're all on the same page. We keep using these terms, economic liberalization, trade deficits.
Right.
What do they actually mean? Plain English.
Good point. So economic liberalization, basically, it's the government doing less, fewer rules, less control over prices and trade, more freedom for businesses to do their thing, letting supply and demand do the work.
Makes sense. And trade deficits. You said Argentina has one, and this policy could make it worse.
Right. Think of it this way. If you're spending more each month than you earn,
you're in trouble.
Yeah, you got a deficit. A trade deficit's the same. A country's importing more than it's exporting, so more money going out than coming in.
So they're already importing more.
Yeah.
And now they're making imports even cheaper.
Yeah, kind of like pouring gasoline on a fire.
Ooh, there.
Sigh.
No, I like it. But let's not forget about the people in all this.
Absolutely.
Real lives affected.
Right.
That's why understanding all these different views and what could happen is so important. I think we've done a good job setting the stage, laying it all out.
I think so.
But now I want to dig deeper. How will consumers and businesses actually be affected? What did the podcast say about that?
That's where things get really interesting. It really did. The podcast went deep on how consumers might be affected, and it's complicated. On the one hand, people are excited. Lower prices, who doesn't love that? Imagine a new phone, a laptop, way cheaper.
Yeah. Especially with how expensive everything is right now, inflation and all that.
Right, exactly. It could be a big help for a lot of people. Did the podcast say how much prices might actually drop?
I think they did, yeah.
Yeah, they estimated electronics, smartphones, laptops could go down like 15%, even 20%.
Wow.
Cars, too. Some models, maybe 10% cheaper. They even had this example. A popular car, it costs about 4 million pesos now.
Okay.
With these tax cuts. Maybe down to 3.6 million.
That's a lot. But what about those businesses? How can they compete with that?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. The podcast talked about a few things. Some economists said Argentine businesses, they might need to shift gears, not just compete on price.
Right.
Find what makes them special, Maybe offer unique stuff, higher quality, better service, find their niche and own it.
Like a small shop, handmade goods instead of mass-produced stuff.
Exactly. They also talked about innovation. If Argentine businesses can come up with new tech products that really fit local needs, they might be able to carve out a space for themselves, even with all these cheaper imports coming in.
Makes sense. But innovation, that takes money, resources, and some businesses are struggling already.
Right, which is where the government comes in. The podcast, they emphasize that. Argentine businesses, they're going to need help, investments in research, maybe tax breaks for innovative companies, or even programs to help them modernize.
So the government, they have a big role to play.
Yeah, big time. But let's not forget those job losses.
Right. The podcast talked about that too.
Yeah. It wasn't easy to hear, but they acknowledged it. Some businesses, they might not make it. And that means job losses, especially in manufacturing and tech. Those industries that rely on imports a lot, they even talk to some workers in those areas. A lot of anxiety, not knowing what's next.
It's tough, people losing their jobs. Did the podcast have any solutions? Anything to help with those job losses?
Yeah, they had some ideas. Retraining programs, for example, help people learn new skills for different industries, and social safety nets, things like unemployment benefits, to support people while they're looking for new jobs.
That makes sense. But even with those, could this policy strain things? Like the social and economic fabric of Argentina?
It's a real concern. The podcast didn't hide that. They said if these tax cuts lead to lots of job losses, economic hardship, it could get messy. Unrest, even political instability.
So Miley, he's on a tightrope here, trying to help the economy, help consumers, but lots of risks.
Yeah, and that brings us back to that big question. Is this the right path? Sustainable recovery or just more instability? The podcast, they didn't have a clear answer, and honestly, I don't think anyone does yet. It depends how businesses adapt, what the government does, even what happens with the global economy.
So we're all watching closely. But what I found encouraging was the debate. In Argentina, people are really talking about this. The podcast did a great job showing those different sides, that there's no easy answer here.
It's not black and white. Lots of different arguments, and we need to consider all of them. That's what's important.
That's a big takeaway from this deep dive. This policy, it's complex. It's going to take time to see the full impact. But today, we've given you the tools to start thinking about it. We've looked at the benefits, the risks, what people in Argentina are saying.
And we connected all that to the bigger economic picture, trade deficits, economic liberalization, how all that fits into this decision.
Exactly. You're ready to follow this story, form your own opinions. But there's one more thing we got to explore before we wrap up.
You mean that challenge from the podcast?
You got it. They asked us to think like an Argentine business owner.
Yeah.
Yeah, facing all these cheaper imports. It really got me thinking. If I was running a business there, like tech or manufacturing, I'd be sweating. What would I even do? Lower my prices to compete? Try a totally different market?
Tough spot to be in. The podcast, they didn't have any easy answers, but they did say, think outside the box, you know. What stuck with me was that idea of focusing on local strengths. Argentina, they've got talented people, unique resources. Maybe businesses can use those to make products that are really special appeal to a certain market, even if they can't be the cheapest.
So not trying to be everything for everyone. Be the best at something specific, something you can only get there. Did they have any examples of businesses already doing that?
They did. They talked about this small tech company in Buenos Aires. They're making software, but just for the Argentine agricultural industry.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they're not trying to take on like the big global companies. They're focused on this niche where they really get the local needs.
That's smart. Play to your strengths.
Yeah.
What other strategies did the podcast mention?
They talked about working together, collaboration, you know. Maybe businesses can team up, share resources, combine their expertise, even start joint ventures. Working together, they might be able to achieve more, you know.
Yeah.
Develop new solutions they couldn't do alone.
Strength in numbers. Right. Like if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Exactly. And the podcast, they also said businesses got to be flexible. Things are changing fast, you know. The ones who can adapt, they'll be the ones who succeed. Maybe that means going after a new market, trying new technology, maybe even completely changing their business model.
So be open to change. Take some risks. This whole import tax thing could actually spark some real innovation in Argentina. New ideas, new businesses.
I think you're right. That's a great way to look at it. And that's what I really take away from all of this. This policy, it's a big deal. It's going to have a ripple effect for sure. But it's also a chance for businesses to adapt, be creative, maybe come out even stronger.
I love that.
Well,
We've talked about the downsides, the risks, but there's a chance for good to come out of this too.
Absolutely. And to the listener who sent us that podcast, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
For letting us explore this. We just scratched the surface today. But hopefully you understand a little better now what's at stake, the different opinions, and what could happen next.
Exactly. This story, it's not over. So keep following it. Keep asking questions and think about what this all means for the people of Argentina.
And if you're sitting there thinking, what would I do if I was a business owner there? Well, that means we did our job.
You got it. That's what this deep dive is all about, getting you to think, to engage with these big issues, maybe even come up with your own solutions.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, keep diving deep.